I'm Ellen Marie Næss. I'm museum lecturer here at the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. And today I'm going to invite you in to have a little special tour to talk about my own special topic, the Oseberg ship, of course, the two ladies who were buried in it, and then what this amazing burial and the ship tells us about the Viking cosmology, their beliefs, the way they handled their loved ones, and in general the thoughts. And that's where we want to go. That's the interesting part of the history. So welcome, join me. The best way for traveling in the Viking period in Scandinavia was by boat. It was a lot of water, seawater and freshwater lakes. So naturally, this idea of traveling in real life, when the Vikings died, they thought that they were going to travel somewhere, and the only way to travel was by boat. So travel from the living to the dead was also a journey that could easily, or at least logical, be done by boat. For the top people in society, this way of traveling to the kingdom of death, they wanted that to look spectacular, and they were buried in vessels or ships like that. For more normal people, they were buried in smaller boats. And for those poorest people in society, they didn't even get that. They got a hole in the ground. So there was a big difference on status, also in the way that you took your last journey from the living to the dead. So all the ships in this museum, we have 3, they has been used as sailing ships, and then they were reused as burial ship for important members of the society. One of those ships in the mythology is a ship that has to do with Ragnarok, which is the event when the world ends. And this ship is a ship that was built by the nails of the dead persons, and it's going to be used for the evil forces to be transported across the sea and to the last battlefield. On this last battlefield, they will meet the gods, the good forces, and the evil and the bad forces will fight each other, and they will lose, and the whole thing will end in fire. And luckily for us, just want to mention that, the world is going to wake again as new. But this ship, since it was built by the nails of the dead ones, it was pretty important for the Vikings to cut those nails of those people who died. If not, the ship Naglafar, meaning the nail traveler, if they didn't cut the nails, this ship would grow too fast, and they didn't want that. So it's logical and easy to understand that since the Viking ships were so important in the life of the Vikings, they also had a part in the belief and the cosmology as the natural way of traveling. So this ship was placed in a grave with 2 dead women inside, and it was ready to travel to the kingdom of death and bring the 2 deceased women safely there. But not so. Since this ship was firmly moored from the stern with a thick rope, and this rope went through the ground twice around a huge boulder and held this ship in the grave. And the reason for that, we do not know. It's a mystery. And I must say, I love a good mystery in the archaeology, but still there are some explanations. Perhaps one or both of those 2 ladies had a religious role, and in the real life, they could have some part of a shaman role, and they were traveling as a shaman, which meant that they were leaving the bodies and the soul were traveling. And in this phase of traveling, it was important that the soul could find back to the body. And in this situation, of course, obviously, you can't have a body on a ship and it disappear, and the soul come back searching for the body and it's not there. That's a problem. Perhaps that's the explanation for this. We don't know, but I think it might give some sense. So those two ladies, they're so intriguing. I would like to invite you to go and meet them in person. Follow me. So here we are visiting the two ladies who were buried in the Oseberg ship. The younger one, she was around 60 when she died. It's a decent age in the Viking period. But the older one managed to be almost 80. So they're two, let's say, good adult women. And we do not know if they were related in any way. They might have been mother and daughter. We do not know yet, working on that. But I think that both of them were high members of the society. We know that the older one had cancer in the last stadium, so she probably died of that. But of course, we can never be completely 100% sure, but because even if you have a deadly disease, you can die of something else. And that brings us to the question about who was the main person in this grave, and we do not know. It could be the older one, it can be the younger one, and it is possible that not the main person has been killed, has been offered to follow the first one in the grave. It's possible. The Vikings did commit human sacrifice, and especially in a burial among top society like this, it was important to show the gods and the living what kind of level we were on. It was a very special situation. And it was not only a possible human sacrifice in this burial, there were also a lot of animals who were killed, offered, and put into the grave. Human sacrifices are also mentioned in some written sources. And we have the author Snorre, who lived in Iceland a couple of hundred years after the Viking period, and he wrote down stories about the kings and the Vikings and also of the mythology. It's a wonderful source for us, even though it's written quite a while after it happened. So he mentions human sacrifices in the sagas of the Norwegian kings. There are some situations who are so special and that they need a really sacrifice. And then they needed the king to offer himself or to even offer him his son. So an offering on this level obviously claims as a member of the top society. Human sacrifices are also a part in the myth about the gods. And the chief god, the main god, Odin, he also offered himself to himself. He hung himself in a tree for 9 days and 9 nights, and as a result, he got wisdom. So it was an offering, but he got a very important skill afterwards, this amazing wisdom and his ability to understand what was going on in the world, was, of course, important for the humans. The Oseberg burial were also the last resting place for a lot of animals. There were animals offered to follow the two ladies in the grave, and there were 6 dogs. You can see the dog chains and a dog collar here. There were 2 cows, and there were 15 horses. That's a lot of horses. Some of them were hit in the head with an axe or something similar, and others had their head cut off. This is a riding saddle, probably used by one of the ladies. One of my favorite, this beautiful ornamented riding whip. And then there is a very interesting detail. The funeral happened in late summer, and even in Scandinavia, late summer is still green. There is no frost or snow. But these horses still have spikes in the hooves. So the horses were prepared for a travel on icy and slippery roads. Why is that? I think the explanation is that in the Viking cosmology, the Viking belief, they had several places where the dead went when they died. They had Valhalla, which is known for all the popular culture, all the films, that brave warriors went to Odin in Valhalla. But perhaps the most important place for the dead to go for the most people was Hel. And that's where we have the word Hel. Hel is a person. It was a daughter of Loki, and it's also the place. This daughter, when she was little, the gods understood that she and her brothers, the Midgardsorm and the Fenriswolf, they were up to no good. So they placed the three siblings somewhere safe. So the little girl Hel, she grew up as the empress in the kingdom of death. She received all the dead souls. And her kingdom, Hel, was cold. And it's described as a cold place, and the road towards Hel is icy, and it goes in the direction of north. So when you go to Hel, you will travel north and down on slippery roads. So I think the horses were really prepared to take the two ladies and themselves to Hel. This wagon was a part of the grave gifts that were put into the grave with the two women. And as you can see, this is not a wagon used for, meant for everyday use for average people. This is a luxury wagon for two prominent ladies. And they used it for showing off, telling everyone how important they were. And the ornamentation on this grave would give people some hints of the roles of those two ladies. Behind on the wagon there are cats, and you can't have a wagon pulled by cats, it doesn't work. But you can have a wagon pulled by horses with ornamentation and cats on it. And the reason for this, cats could have a connection with the role of those two ladies. If one or both of them had a role as some kind of a priester for the fertility goddess Freya. This fertility goddess was in an agrar society, of course, important. It has to do with wealth, that things were growing, that people had enough food, so it was crucial. So this goddess, she had in the myth a wagon, and this wagon was pulled by cats. And she traveled like that on her journeys. For example, there is a story how she searched for her husband riding around the world in this wagon pulled by cats. Wagons has other roles in the myths as well, and perhaps more known than the wagon of the fertility goddess Freya is the wagon of the thunder god Thor. He had a wagon pulled by goats, and he sometimes liked to travel across the sky in his wagon, and he was hitting in there with his hammer. And the wheels and the hammer made the thunder and the lightning. So when the Vikings heard the thunder and the weather was bad, they knew that Thor was on tour in his wagon. However, here on the other side of the wagon, there is a picture, a scene that we not fully understand. It's a picture of three persons, a man holding a knife in one hand and a horse in another. There is a woman holding his hand with a knife, perhaps preventing him in using it, I don't know. And there is a person riding the horse. This is a scene so clear that it absolutely must have given some meaning to the Vikings. It's a story, they knew this story. We've lost it. So we don't understand what the meaning behind this scene. It must have been something important. If not, they wouldn't have put so much effort in making this scene. Also on the wagon, there are some men heads, and some of them are really well groomed. It's showing the opposite of some of this popular culture, not groomed men with hair all over the place. it shows a well-groomed man taking care of his beard and his hair and his look. Just look at this. In the popular culture, in the films and games and movies, we very often get an impression of a quite simple Viking male most of the time, fighting all the time, eating, drinking, being happy. But through this archaeological material, we get a glimpse of a Viking culture much more sophisticated than that. And they had a belief system, a cosmology, much complicated, and they put their actions into this system. And through these archaeological sources, we can get a meaning of it. So, for example, a funeral like the Oseberg, in the situation of a funeral, the Vikings would understand or believe that this funeral opened the gates towards the world of the dead. And in this world of the dead ones, there were evil and dangerous forces, and the living needed to protect themselves towards that. And some of the ornamented figures in the grave might be interpreted as protectors. Like this one, it's my favorite. It's called academic since it's a bit strict in the shape and ornamentation. But he and 4 other heads were put in the grave, 4 of them, making a square around the bed where the 2 dead people were laying, and they might have been protected, not the deceased ones, but the living ones, against those forces who were moving around in this funeral situation. And this and other examples shows us a very interesting way of looking at the world. And that's the whole thing with history and archaeology. We are searching for the human beings. We are searching for the way people have been handling their life and their world, and to see what we can use and what we can learn from the history.